Well, this morning we've seen the basis of another laughable BBC so-called investigation. This BBC investigation comes 3 weeks after, in an internal BBC meeting, which encompassed a number of the newsroom journalists and investigative journalists, after they done their stories on Avenel in the days after that, well, they decided that got good traction and got good attention online, and therefore they felt they should dig in to me further. That's the words that we used, and they should put resources into being able to do more stories about me. Actually, in this meeting, it was also said that they needed to find a way to name me as a member of the UVF, because that would preclude other sections of the BBC from using me as a commentator. And of course, this is all part of what I actually wrote about 4 days ago, funny enough, 4 days before the BBC came up with their latest ingenious allegation in relation to the fact that there is a liberal elite cabal within the BBC. There's a war going on between those who think that the BBC should exist as a political platform to foster consensus, and those who think that the so-called deplorables, people like myself, people like Jim Allister and Jim Wells, should be afforded a voice and a platform on the public broadcaster. So it is in all of this context that we have this farcical BBC allegation about a signature on a forum. Now, what they tried to do, and the purpose in all of this, and that's what I said from the outset of the interview they done with me, is that they wanted to put what is essentially a criminal allegation to me. They wanted me to answer to them as if they are some kind of police force or some type of investigative body with responsibility for this, which of course they aren't. And then if I refuse to engage in that, to somehow infer some kind of guilt or innocence from that. Now, that is an outrageous position for the public service broadcaster to take, especially in the context when the journalist's first statement in the interview was that that I had done this. So there was no objectivity at all. The BBC have made their mind up. They've appointed themselves judge, jury, and executioner. But the point that I have made, and this is not new. So this is not a viewpoint that I have developed in the last 24 hours. If you go back and look at my writings for quite some time, I have consistently made the point that I do not believe that people who are being accused by the media of criminal offences should then have to address those allegations, or a failure to do so is then presented as somehow guilt or innocence. So that's the approach which I continue to take with this laughable, ridiculous allegation put forward about a signature on a form. That's where we're at. The vast resources of the BBC put in to try to somehow smear me and damage me, and they come up with a signature on a form. It's absolutely incredible, with actually no allegation of any financial impropriety, no allegation of any gain or loss obtained by or to this particular charity. And most incredibly of all, this allegation centred on a Pastor Mark Gordon. The BBC were not even going to go to Pastor Mark Gordon and ask him if he had in fact independently assessed all of this. They were just going to leave that hanging. And the BBC only went to Pastor Gordon, and I have factual documentary proof of this, only went to Pastor Gordon when I said, you need to go to him, and he has to be afforded an opportunity to give his account of this. They just wanted to completely skip all over that. But as I say, I continued in a 30-minute interview with the BBC to continually say, I am not setting a precedent of every time this political left-wing cabal within BBC Northern Ireland wanted to make a laughable criminal allegation against me, that I would then I would have to answer those allegations, or a failure to do so would lead people to infer some kind of guilt or innocence. So I stood on the principle which I've stood on for, if you look at my writings, for quite some time. I am not engaging in false allegations being made by the BBC and starting to try and explain myself to the BBC. And I was totally vindicated in this approach, because after half an hour of an interview, which apparently was all about a signature on a form in relation to a community group, then we had the money shot at the end, when all of a sudden questions about a signature jumped to one final question: are you a member of the UVF? Now, if you think about what they were trying to do, had I engaged in their first 30 minutes of questioning, when they were essentially making allegations of other criminal offences against me, and I had answered and I had explained and I had opened all of them doors to allow them to just pile more false allegations upon more false allegations. Then when they came to their final allegation, if I had went, that is absolutely outrageous, I'm not engaging in that, they then would have said, oh, well, you engage with all the other criminal allegations we made about you, why not this one? And tried to infer some kind of guilt in relation to that. And on that point, naturally, membership of the UVF is a serious criminal offence. I am a law-abiding citizen who does not break the law, so it's an absolutely outrageous allegation to make. And on that note, I would say the BBC, last year, when the Chief Constable decided to come out in an attempt which backfired in epic fashion to link me to the UVF, which they then the police had to later retract that. The BBC ran that as a top story on their BBC Online. However, when it became clear, firstly, that the that the attempted conditions that the police tried to put on bail in relation to me were actually unlawful, and the Nolan Show done a whole programme about that, did the BBC newsroom put that online? Of course not. When I defeated the PSNI in the High Court and their actions were deemed unlawful, did BBC Northern Ireland carry the court report? Of course they didn't, because BBC Northern Ireland have an agenda. This particular cabal within BBC Northern Ireland have an agenda. And I would also point out, when we had a number of what ultimately ended up substantiated allegations about Arcani, a Roma community organisation, a charity in South Belfast, and their links to Sinn Féin and prominent Republicans. Did the BBC newsroom investigate those serious allegations? No. The BBC newsroom went out with a camera and done a puff piece with that particular organisation. A puff piece. Perhaps the most fawning, laughable piece you would ever see of propaganda, and actually that looks incredibly foolish following the later Stephen Nolan Show revelations, and credit to the Nolan Show, of course, who have not allowed themselves to become a tool of this political cabal. But as I say, I'm happy to front up and engage with any journalist. I would have sat with the BBC journalist all day long, but it's an incredibly revealing and important interview. So if the BBC think it's in the public interest to use taxpayers' money for this ludicrous so-called investigation into your signature and into me, well, it's equally then in the public interest to publish the outcome of that investigation, which they have an interview over 30 minutes long. Publish it all. Publish it all. I dare you to publish every single bit of it, and if you don't, well, many people will be wondering why you don't want to publish it and why it would look so bad for the BBC. So we will see where we go next, but as I say, if the BBC want to make an allegation, go ahead and make it, and let's see where it goes.